social media manager. And joining us today we have Susan Schoelwer, our Executive Director of Historic Preservation and Collections at Mount Vernon. How are you today, Susan?
Great, Sarah. Thank you.
Good.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So Susan is going to talk to you today about the future preservation projects happening next year at Mount Vernon in 2020. So before I hand it off to her though, just a couple reminders as always. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Ask us any questions you have. I'll be looking for your questions and asking them as they pop up to Susan. And also a reminder, we are in the final stretch of our 5th and final year of the Preservation Challenge, which means if you donate to Mount Vernon to help us with these upcoming preservation projects for 2020, your gift will be tripled between now and the end of the year, thanks to a generous donor, Karen Bookwald-Wright of Mount Vernon, Ohio. So you can press that donate button or click the link to donate at any time during the broadcast or after, and you'll be helping us with these projects that Susan's about to talk about. So I think I'll just kick it off to Susan.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks to all of you who are tuning in and have been listening to our Facebook Live presentations on the Preservation Challenge. We've got a lot of exciting projects going on, and we've kind of structured these presentations kind of like the Christmas Carol. So my colleague Tom Reinhardt, our Director of Preservation, talked about the projects that we've just worked on, the projects past, the most recent Facebook Live. Our architectural historian, Caroline Spurry, and our painter, Marvin Amayo, talked about the real behind-the-scenes, nitty-gritty, ongoing maintenance projects. And so I'm kind of the ghost of Preservation Future, and to talk about some of the upcoming projects. And that really brings me to the point of saying, you know, preservation isn't about just a bunch of old stuff. Preservation is really about the future. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren, and I want them to live in a world that is not just centered on them in the here and now, but that they understand that there's a continuity from the past to the present to the future, to connect to the ideals of George Washington and our founding fathers and the values of our country today. And so it's really my privilege to be head of Historic Preservation and Collections at Mount Vernon, which is the team that really makes it possible to share George and Martha Washington's Mount Vernon with more than 1 million visitors each year who come to Mount Vernon from across the nation and really around the world. And we talk a lot about immersive experiences. And to me, coming to a place like Mount Vernon is the ultimate immersive experience, because it draws you out of yourself into a different world where you can imagine people living other lives. And I think history is not about just memorizing names and dates, but it's about understanding that things could have been different. And we live in this amazing democratic republic because people like George and Martha Washington and their peers, you know, had these ideals and created this nation based on, you know, the power is in the people and an elective representation and the rule of law and order. And so when you come to Mount Vernon, you can really connect with those values and those ideals. So I've been talking very abstractly, so let's get down to some of the nuts and bolts. I want to just share with you, although I'm talking about future projects, I want to share with you some of our, it's just some real breaking news, and I have some pictures to share with you of things that we can't see from right where I am. But breaking news, just last week, we commissioned a new fire suppression system for the mansions. In the mansion, we have one mansion, not many, for the mansion and the outbuildings along the North Lane. And this is really exciting. This is a state-of-the-art system. One of the problems for museum collections and historic buildings is if you have a traditional fire suppression system let loose with a bunch of water, you might as well have had a fire because you're going to destroy many of the objects that you want to preserve. So we need a fire protection system that not only protects people, but protects the objects. And so this is something called a mist system. And when it activates, which we hope it never does, frankly, it creates tiny droplets of water, almost like a fog, that comes out, and that expanded surface of those water droplets cools the temperature, effectively sucks the air out of the fire, and then the heat turns it to steam. So instead of water drenching your objects, it's just like this light sort of fog. So it really preserves the object. So we're very excited about that accomplishment. Looking to the future, we're going to be looking to expand that system into the additional original Washington buildings on the South Lane, buildings like the stable, the smokehouse, the laundry room, that are so important to understanding how Mount Vernon functioned as a place. And that brings me to one other point that I wanted to make, and that is that at Mount Vernon, we're not just preserving one man or one family's house, we're preserving a community. And so we have 45 acres in the historic area on display. We have something like 40 buildings, 16 of which are original 18th century structures from George and Martha Washington's time. And that's really amazing, but it's also a big challenge, as you can imagine. Those buildings and that acreage in 1799, when the last year of Washington's life, those were home to about 150 people. 5 members of the Washington family, about 20 white employees, Washington's secretary, the gardener, and then about 125 enslaved men, women, and children. And so this is the world in which we lived, and you can come and visit and immerse yourselves in it. And all of that is possible thanks to the support of you and other donors, because Mount Vernon gets no government funding. And many people don't know that. They think we are part of the National Park Service or a federal site. But we're an independent charitable organization, and so we rely upon your donations, your contributions to do the amazing preservation work that my team does. So, what's coming up? Okay, so this past year, in addition to the fire suppression system, one of our major projects was restoring the west front of Mount Vernon. So building on that success, in 2020, we're going to be moving on to do the same process on the north end of the mansion and the south end. So we're looking now at the north end, which is the last addition that Washington made to the mansion. It contains his amazing new room, which is just this grand reception space. And it has this great, what we call a Venetian window. This was a very stylish architectural feature. And what you often don't realize when you see it in photographs is how big it is. This is a public building size window, not typical of what you might see on a private residence in the 18th century. So what are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to be doing the same steps that we did on the west front, removing layers of encrusted paint that have been put on since 1980. I think you can perhaps see where some of that paint is coming off, revealing the original boards. And once we get the paint off, we'll be looking at the original boards, carefully documenting what is original, what repairs have taken place, what repairs are needed, making those repairs. We've already restored the window. So in fact, the window that you're looking at right now is a very good replacement made by one of our master carpenters. And we'll be putting the originals back in once we've done restoration of the window frame itself. Yeah, Sarah.
I have a question for Susan.
Yes.
So we've had a lot of people joining us. Thank you for watching. A lot of people are happy to see we're doing this preservation, continuing to improve Mount Vernon. Will people be able to see the work on the window inside the mansion? How is that all going to take place?
Well, the windows itself, the original sashes have been taken out and are being worked on in our conservation lab by our architectural conservator. So mostly people will be seeing work on the outside. We'll be needing to scaffold the outside again for much of the summer from April until October. So when you come, you'll be able to see preservation in action. You'll be able to see those original boards emerging from that paint. You'll be able to see our craftsmen today basically recreating the same processes that George Washington's craftsmen and enslaved carpenters used in the 18th century. So most of the work will be going on outside. So another project that we're going to be working on next year will be something that visitors really won't be able to see because we'll be in the planning phase. And that's, if you look behind me, you see the entrances to Mount Vernon's cellar. And the cellar is really this amazing space that supported the rest of the house. Most of it was used for food storage in the Washington's time. Now, in the many years since, it's been used as kind of a support structure, and so it has all kinds of heating and air conditioning, ventilation ducts, electrical conduits, and much of that has been made obsolete over time, and we've added layers and layers. So we're going to be going back in, doing a major project to look at stabilizing the wooden framing of the mansion and restoring the cellar, putting in a new HVAC system that will have separate zones for the upper floors and the cellar, which need different conditions for preservation and for people. And so we'll be doing the planning work for that in this coming year and raising funds for what's going to be a major project. So dollars that you contribute today as part of the Preservation Challenge, remember, are matched so that your gift is tripled if you contribute by the end of the year. And I know there are lots of demands on your pocketbooks at this time of year for gifts for every organization, but there's really a benefit to not putting it off. Don't put it off till January, because if you do it by the 31st of December, your gift to Mount Vernon is tripled. So any other questions yet, Sarah?
I have a question. We're still getting people tuning in. So how long do you expect things like the cellar to take and the window to take? Like, what is the timeline?
Well, the timeline for the north end and the south end is basically the same as it was for the west front this past year. We will start as soon as the weather warms up enough for the paint remover to work on taking off the paint. We'll go through that process, and there are about 28 layers of paint that we have to work through, so that takes a while. Then there are several weeks needed for the documentation and the repairs to the wood frame, and then we'll be repainting. So if it goes as it did last year, we'll be starting in April. We'll hope to be finishing up by October. So in addition to your contributions, pray for a good weather during that season when we are doing this work, because rain stops the work and we have to take a break. So, and the cellar work, because we are just in the planning phase, we anticipate completing the planning phase next year. And that will give us detailed design drawings to go out to bid with different contractors, engineers, craftsmen. And that will really give us an idea how long that will take, but it will certainly be a major multi-year project. But the importance of it is it really is also a sort of multi-generational project, and we really believe that this work is essential to really preparing the mansion for the next, say, 100 years. Because remember, this is a wooden structure. It was built for one family's use. It was never intended to have 1 million people a year going up and down the staircase, which the daily traffic is something like 3 semi-trucks running through the mansion every day in terms of weight. So just think about the wear and tear that creates.
Very good. Thank you, Susan. Lise says the work in the parlor was spectacular. I think they're talking about the work we did in the front parlor this last year. Is there anything interior-wise of the mansion working on? Right.
Great question. So the work that we've been doing in the interiors, what we call room restoration projects, this phase of interior projects started in 2014. So really about the same time we started this 5-year preservation challenge. we have been systematically working through the rooms in the mansion, bringing to bear new architectural research, new documentary research. We're making use of new paint analysis techniques, bringing together a database of the Washington's furnishings to better understand how the mansion evolved over a 50-year period from the 1750s to 1800s. So we've currently done the restoration of the new room, which is this grand room here in the north wing where we are. The front parlor, which I agree, it was an amazing project, really spurred by a ledger, a manuscript that turned up at a small auction in Maine that gave us new insights to the Washington's furnishings. We're really concentrating right now on the second floor bedrooms. So we've worked on what we call the chintz room and the blue room, both of which are named sort of by their decorative features. And I'm glad you asked that, because somewhere here I have a photograph of our next room project, which is what the Washingtons in their day called the yellow room. And as you can see, it's right now a work in progress. We have created a reproduction of the bed that George Washington ordered in the 1750s with its gold damask, silk and wool damask hangings. We're going to be working in 2022 on the architectural restoration, and that will involve really looking at the stability of the plaster, going in and looking at the framing, the wooden lath, restoring the ceiling. And the curators are currently, we know that all of the bedrooms were wallpapered in Washington's time, which really gives them a different look. We have fragments of wallpaper that survive that give us an idea of what was in each room, and so the curators have identified a pattern that we're having reproduced, will be put on the walls. We've done new paint analysis to identify the color of the woodwork. Again, we'll be restoring the window. And all of this will really return the room to its glory in the Washington's day when they used it as their best bedchamber. Now, today we typically think of the master bedroom as the best bedroom in the house, but in the 18th century, the best bedchamber would have been reserved for important guests. And the value of the items in Washington's probate inventory indicate that this yellow room, which is the only bedroom in the house that people can actually walk through. So again, when we finish it, it will be this really immersive experience, giving people the feeling of what it was like to be a guest of the Washingtons. Sarah, another question?
We do. Amy has a question and is wondering how many rooms still need to be restored in the mansion?
Well, let's see. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think we're at 9
right.
And that's not counting closets and back halls and things like that. But 9 rooms that have yet to do this major kind of restoration, as well as ultimately we'll be working on the 3rd floor. And the cellar, and making those areas of the house more accessible, certainly for some of our highlight tours. We're also going to be working on the kitchen, which is, really this really important space in the 18th century. It's not just a place for food preparation, but it's really kind of a gathering place for a lot of people on the plantation. You might have gardeners bringing in produce from the kitchen garden, or meat coming in from the smokehouse, and people are kind of meeting there and exchanging gossip, and the waiters would be plating up food to take it into the dining room. So it's really a bustling center of activity, and it's really an industrial sized kitchen. It's almost like you're running a small restaurant here from the number of people the Washingtons are entertaining. So the kitchen is further down the line in terms of when we will get to it with our architectural work, but that's one of the upcoming projects as well. So maybe we want to talk about the outdoor projects then too.
I was just about to ask. We covered the mansion, I think. So what are you working on outside the mansion next year?
Right. So one of our big projects, if you look off to the east across the Potomac River, you can see almost like a horizon pool where the land drops off. And that goes down to what in the 18th century was called a ha-ha wall, which is a brick wall that you can only see the top of from the mansion, so that it doesn't obstruct the view. And in 2017, we had some erosion problems, and here's an image of some of the damage that was done to the central portion of that ha-ha wall. Now, we've been doing a lot of research, and the work that you see going on in the mansion, on the outbuildings, in the historic area is really, in a way, only the tip of the iceberg, because for every week or month that we spend actually doing physical preservation, conservation, restoration work, we will have spent weeks or months or even years doing research and planning. And so it is with this east slope. We've done a lot of work with geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, to figure out what is the best way of stabilizing that slope, inserting better drainage, and will ultimately be rebuilding the wall. That's something that is a big project for us coming up in 2020. And again, all these projects are made possible only through our partnership with you who are interested in preservation and believe in its role in our future, really, and are making contributions to support it. So we are so grateful for that.
Thank you, Susan, and don't forget you can click donate at any time during the broadcast. So we had a question from Lise. She wanted to know where on the property is the kitchen. Is it a separate building, back when you were talking about the kitchen?
Right, great question. So the kitchen is a separate building. It is one of two what are called dependencies that effectively flank the mansion and form a courtyard around this circular space in front of the mansion. And so the kitchen is a separate two-story building. Up above the cooking area itself, there were lodging rooms for the enslaved and later the hired cook. There's also a larder, it's called, which has a lower floor to provide cooler temperatures for short-term storage. There's a scullery where pots and pans and probably some crockery was washed and indeed broken sometimes. But then the food would be plated up there and carried through what's called a colonnade, which is a sort of open archway that connects from the kitchen to the west vestibule, which leads into the dining room. So that's maybe, 20 steps or so from the kitchen to the dining room.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Lise, for the question. So you've talked about the east lawn, we've talked about the mansion and the kitchen. Is there anything else preservation-wise happening on these?
Oh, yes.
Maybe a silly
We
question.
have something like at least a 10-year plan of projects that we are working on. We are currently getting assessments for what restoration work needs to be done to George Washington's ice house, which is a structure, 18th century structure located down the east slope toward the river. Really unusual structure. It has a shaft going down about 25 feet and then a tunnel going out onto the slope that ice could be brought in from the Potomac River. George Washington built that in the 1780s so he could have ice cream, among other uses. So it's really an interesting structure. We are also getting assessments of the condition and necessary restoration needed to George and Martha Washington's tomb, which is next to the mansion or really equal to the mansion, is one of the real core places to visit for visitors to the estate, to come and pay tribute at Washington's tomb, lay a wreath. That's a structure that was built in the 1830s. It's built into a hillside, so there are some structural concerns with the earth. It's had some water damage, so that's going to be a major project for us. We've got lots of other projects going on. We're restoring the North Garden House, which is this wonderful little 18th century octagonal structure. There's the tomb. If you haven't been there, there's George Washington's tomb. And then this is the North Garden House, which is this wonderful, one of two octagonal structures, which are really unusual for small structures like this to survive. Washington used it for things like storing seeds. He believed that if you once got a plant, you should never have to go back to the nursery and get another one because you should save the seeds. It was also used as a schoolroom at one time. And this illustrates some of the challenges of preservation because from the outside, it looks like it's in pretty good shape, except maybe you can see in this picture, it's had some damage to the roof. So when we began to take a look at it to replace the roof, we discovered that while the exterior siding was in good shape in 18th century and the interior plaster was in good shape in 18th century, there had been some significant damage from water, from rot, from insects to the framing. And so this was a project that kind of grew like Topsy, if you will. We planned that it would take X number of weeks, and when we got into it, we discovered it was much more complicated. So our preservation carpenters have been hard at work saving as much of this original fabric as they can, putting in pieces, doing the kind of restoration that can be reversed if necessary in the future, documenting what's original, what they did, and we're just about finished with restoring this framing, and we'll be putting the roof back on now beginning the first of the year, and then turning our attention to the siding going down the structures. So that's one of the projects in the historic area. Got another question for me, Sarah?
Yes. Well, Karen said you look cold. You should move into the sun. It's a little cold.
It is a little chilly for Virginia here. I think it puts us in mind again. You know, it's one of those days that you really can imagine Washington being here, walking out, seeing this magnificent view across the river. In fact, at the end of his life, that's what he was doing, was really marking trees along this east bank that he wanted cut back so they wouldn't block the view. And that was how he really took a chill and died just 2 days later. So I don't want to end on that kind of sad note, but the kind of, it reminds you of being here at the time. And again, this idea of we really do whole place preservation here. It's not just a matter of restoring buildings, repairing carpentry, doing interiors, but it's about really recreating or continuing or continually touching back to the whole environment. And so preserving the viewshed, as we call it, that view across the river is an important part of our preservation effort that your donations help to support, in addition to preserving the buildings, preserving the landscapes, preserving the trees, preserving the gardens. It's all part of being able to come to Mount Vernon and really touch the 18th century. If you can believe it, there have been at times planned things like an oil treatment refinery treatment plant across the river. So instead of coming out from Mount Vernon, seeing this magnificent view, you would have seen an oil treatment facilities. That really gets in the way of this immersive experience that I was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just have a little bit more time today, but you talked about a lot of preservation projects for 2020. What do you think, out of all those projects, are the most pressing, the most concern?
Well, I think that, the most urgent, I would say, is this exterior restoration of the mansion, because you really need that tight seal on the exterior to keep water from getting into the interior. So resealing that will seal up the interior, protect those rooms that we are working on. Long term, the work that we're going to be planning and doing in the cellar is essential for the long-term stability and preservation of the mansion. So I think those are two of our really critical projects. Also, the tomb is a very important project because that is such an important structure on the estate.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. thank you all for joining us as well. And again, just a reminder, you can donate at any time. Hit the donate button. Go to mountvernon.org/donate now through the end of the year to have your gift tripled to help Susan and her staff do these important projects to preserve George Washington's home and everybody's home that lived here.
Thank you all again for tuning in, for listening to us, for your questions, for your donations, and please come and visit Mount Vernon whenever you can.
Yeah, come see the preservation in action, like Susan said. All right, we'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you.